Hi, everyone. This is Rose Horowitz. I'm really happy to welcome you to my third Woman to Follow live stream. I am I am a Pulitzer-nominated journalist and the founder of the hashtag Woman to Follow. Pleased to have with us tonight a fantastic guest. She is the executive director of the Arab Institute for Women, and also has been is a global women's rights activist. Her name is Dr. Lina AbiRafeh, and she's going to join us in just a few minutes. And just before she does, I'm just going to give you a very brief intro to Women to Follow. A few years ago, I started Women to Follow with a hashtag that went viral, and it reached 12 million people. Had a reach of 12 million in its first 2 weeks. And now I'm doing my own. I wrote a lot of profiles of women, but with the growth in live stream, I decided to start my own show. So that's what we're doing here today. And we're going to be talking about Afghanistan, the violence against women in Afghanistan, and violence against the Middle East. So I would like to introduce my guest. Her name is Dr. Lina AbiRafeh, and she is a crusader. Hi, Lina. How are you?
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for joining me. You look great. I've been seeing you're like on every podcast and news show there is. So, but you have terrific experience. So I'm just going to introduce you a little more because I didn't get to everything, which is that Lina is, I think, is born in Beirut, and she'll tell us more about that. But she was educated in several countries and has lived and worked in more than 20 countries, including Afghanistan, Lebanon, Nepal, Haiti, Democratic Republic of Congo, and she will tell us more. She is, just want to get this right. She's a TEDx speaker, very great TEDx talk, and she has been listed in the top 100 most influential people in global policy for both 2018 and 2019. And she's been a guest on CNN. I noticed recently you were in a podcast on Skim, one with Clay Aiken for Politicon. And I'm really very honored to have you here, Lina.
The pleasure is mine. I'm delighted. Thank you for doing this.
Well, thank you. I think you knew about the hashtag before we started, so that's great.
Yeah. I've even used it. Absolutely.
Awesome. Okay. Well, tell us first, where you are and how you are.
Well, as you rightly said, it's been a busy time. I am doing well, considering I'm in New York right now. You gave a beautiful summary of my experience. Thank you so much. About 20 different countries over 2 decades, a little bit more. I moved to New York about 2 years ago, so I had a little bit of normal New York time and 1.5 years of lockdown and COVID time. But having said all of that, I've been.
What was that like for you, given the nature of your work that's so global?
Well, I never expected to hear the term lockdown in the States, so that was definitely a surprise, but something that unfortunately I know very well. But what was even more worrying was the idea that intimate partner violence would increase, and we knew that would happen with messages like "stay home and stay safe." Making the assumption that home is safe for all women, and that's not the case. And so I felt like my work, as much as I tried to leave emergencies managed to find me. And so managing that was definitely a big chunk of my time when I expected to be doing other things. And now with what's going on in Afghanistan and certainly what's going on in Lebanon, Haiti, and just about every single country I've lived and worked in, the work doesn't seem to end.
Okay. Uh, have you traveled since things have improved a little bit? Have you been able to travel?
Very little. I managed to go to Lebanon last year after the explosion. On August 4th of last year, there was a massive explosion in the Beirut port, and it decimated a large part of the city and killed several hundred people and injured several thousand. In fact, my apartment was right there on the front lines with a view of the port. So it was a kind of a very personal incident and extremely tragic for a country that was already suffering so much. So right after that happened, in the few weeks after I went to Lebanon.
Okay.
So that was really the biggest trip that I've taken work-wise.
That's a big one.
And,
were you able to connect with some friends and see how people were?
Absolutely. And what I did see was unsurprising that women were out on the front lines, providing services, support, literally taking brooms and sweeping the broken glass off the streets, preparing meals for people, taking in those who had lost their homes, looking after those who were injured. It was exactly as I've seen in other countries where women are the first responders, where women step up, where women create the social safety net, where women are the ones who know what is happening, who is at risk, who needs help, and how to help them. And I've seen that everywhere. And in Lebanon, it was just extraordinary because it was a lot of young women as well, activists and influencers and agitators and feminists and human rights workers and ordinary people, just everybody out on the streets looking after each other.
That's terrific. I hope we'll come back to Lebanon, which I know is facing big problems since that explosion. So top of mind for Americans and many around the world. Can you talk to us about the plight of women in Afghanistan, and then we'll go on from there. But where do you and I guess my question is, have you heard from friends who have either left or are still there, and what are you hearing?
Well, right now, what I'm hearing is that people are worried, that they are staying home, that they're laying low. The fear of what is uncertain, what is to come, has been crippling. In fact, people are very apprehensive. There are two generations, let's say, of women. There are the women who remember the Taliban and the abuses that were inflicted upon them and the restrictions of their mobility and freedom and rights. And the muffling of their choice and voice and movement in just about every aspect of their lives. And they're the young women who were born into freedom, who have gone to school, who ride their bikes in the street, who are educated, who have aspirations, who did not know the time under the Taliban. And so those are the ones who really, who don't know what is going on. I think the older generation is maybe prepared to resist, prepared to fight, to go underground, to find ways to survive, because Afghan women do. But the younger ones, this is a whole new country for them, and one they unfortunately now have to become acquainted with, and very quickly.
And are they turning, the young women, are they turning to groups like you founded and women's right, women's international groups for guidance, or are they turning to the neighbor next door, the aunt, their mother, who have lived through the Taliban?
Well, everybody's staying home, so they're not reaching out to people. People are afraid to do that. They're afraid to be very loud. And so right now, because nobody knows which direction things are going to take or what edicts the Taliban is going to issue, even as they say women are allowed to work, what does that mean? And girls can go to school, well, what does that mean concretely? People don't know. So right now they're staying off the streets and home with their families and waiting to see what might happen. Even as the Taliban seems to claim that they have evolved, that it is a modern version of the Taliban that we knew in the 90s, but people are rightly concerned and apprehensive, and it's better for them to stay home and wait until they understand what exactly is happening. Especially as they've said, they will interpret women's rights and mobilities and freedoms according to Sharia law, according to their interpretation of Islamic law, and that is subject to a wide interpretation, and that is what happened last time as well. So at this stage, it is a wait and see game, and it's a scary one.
And are they even going out of the house at all? Are they going to markets, or they're home?
The people I've spoken to are home and have stayed home and knew this was coming and stockpiled food and prepared for this. This was something that women and women's rights groups and feminist activists saw coming from a year ago when a so-called peace agreement was signed with the Taliban. So that already left women out and undermined their efforts and any advances they had made towards freedom. And so they've been worried. There's been a lot of hesitance, and now that those worries have come to fruition. So people are waiting. I
just putting this up just so people who may not be familiar with what it was like under the Taliban, that when they've now seized Afghanistan, most of Afghanistan this month, and many are concerned, humanitarian, economic concerns. And under the Taliban rule from 1996 to 2001, among other things, women were not allowed to work, girls and young women could not attend school, and women had to be accompanied by a male relative and wear a burqa at all times in public. Is there anything you want to add to what I'm saying there?
Well, I think that is exactly what happened in the 90s. But what I want to say is this, that we would not know the extent of it. We would never have found out had it not been for courageous women who smuggled cameras under burqas and exposed the abuses of the Taliban by filming them. So it was these very women who risked their lives to show us what was happening, to put out a call for help. And they will do that again. And if they were able to wield that power in 1996 when the Taliban took over Kabul, they will do so now and much more loudly with the power of social media, with their networks, with their abilities. They will fight. They will not stop reaching out to their international networks, to each other, to whatever it takes in order to ensure that their lives continue and that they're able to provide for themselves and especially for their daughters. So what we saw in 1996 was an extraordinary act of courage and strength and resilience, because they had to be. They had no choice. And we will see that again. And I think that was a responsibility on us, sorry to cut you off there, but to heed that call and to provide support and resources and tools and funding to Afghan women's groups who will tell us exactly what they need and exactly what they're going to do with it. So now is our opportunity to listen and learn and support in the ways that they ask for, because they know exactly what it is they need. And we just need to deliver that. We owe them that.
Well, thank you. We're going to put up a partial list of some things you've suggested for giving. But let me ask you, if we look back in 1996, where we were in terms of, where the world was in terms of technology and where we are today in 2021. And, what does that ability in technology and the advances in social media allow? What do you think that will allow Afghan women to do today that they couldn't do in 96 or 2000?
Absolutely. I think they'll be able to amplify their calls for help and to galvanize resources and international attention and the media. It will be much easier to do so. But at the same time, the women that I've spoken to over there have had to change their social media names and handles and all of that stuff because they are afraid. The women who are the most outspoken are precisely the ones who are at risk. And so they also have to be careful and disseminate messages in ways that don't put themselves at further risk. We cannot afford to jeopardize their own safety. So they will find ways to do it, and they're already doing it and transmitting messages and reports from the inside. And soon they will start being more and more clear and louder about what it is they need and what they expect from all of us, the international community, the global network of feminists and activists and people who care about this issue, which I hope is everyone. But they also have to exercise caution in doing that because of the situation at the moment.
Does it, at the same time, is it a double-edged sword? Does this explosion in the way we can communicate and social media also make it, very dangerous because people can be tracked?
Absolutely right. I'm asked very often, at least at the start of the Me Too movement, for instance, I was asked, well, where's the rest of the world's Me Too? Where's the Middle East's Me Too? Where are other countries? And I said, people aren't going to Me Too or aren't going to tweet or tag or whatever it is unless the benefits of that outweigh the costs. And as long as they are putting themselves at risk by tying their names, their real names, to these statements that are understandably controversial in this context, they would be reluctant to do it. So they're going to have to be very careful. But I think women will always find ways. We have throughout history, everywhere. Afghan women do it. We all do it. And we'll continue to do it. So the more we pay attention, the more we are attuned to that, the more we are prepared to listen to that in whatever form it is transmitted, the better off they're going to be. But you're absolutely right. Social media is a dangerous and scary place. It's a wonderful tool, but it also presents a lot of new risks and new forms of violence that we have to constantly evolve to be prepared to deal with. It's really hard to stay one step ahead of perpetrators who innovate more quickly than we can keep up.
Okay. Well, let's just take a little break and see. We have people joining us from around the country. I don't know about the world yet, but let's see. Here's somebody who's a loyal follower of another show we do, Rahadan. Here's Therese Steiner, who's saying bonsoir from Massachusetts. Lucio from New Hyde Park in New York. Carla Baranakis, who's a former New York Times copy editor. Laura Myers Casellas, who is in Norwalk, Connecticut. And so I appreciate everybody tuning in. It's great to see so many people that I know and many that I'm sure I don't know. Lina, if you have a moment, it would be great if you could just retweet. Yeah, that would be amazing. Then we can have all the people who are following you follow the show.
But I will do it. In fact, I thought I did it. I will do it again right now as you're talking to me. But it's great to see that so many people are tuned in and that people care and they're interested. I think it's fantastic. Okay. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Teresa, here's a question. Teresa Steiner, who works for Justice Aid, has done great things for our elections. What advice would you give American women in terms of amplifying the voices of women from Afghanistan on social media?
I think you've got to follow all the women who are speaking out, Afghan women, Afghan American women. There's a massive network in the States. There's a big network in Canada. I mean, Afghan women are everywhere in the diaspora, and they are speaking out as well on behalf of their Afghan sisters who are in the country. So pay attention to those women, listen to the Afghan voices that are able to reach us, and they will be very clear in what is needed. And I think our job, like I said, is to just share, forward, retweet, amplify, fund, donate, whatever, sound any alarms that we can. If there's a petition, sign it. If there's a place to fund, donate. If there is a tweet to retweet, then retweet it, because that's what's needed right now, and it's going to take everybody.
And in terms of finding people, is one way through following somebody like you and other women activists? Is that one way? I mean, let's list 3 ways that they can. Let's say you're sitting in the middle of Maine, and you don't know where to find the woman who you should be amplifying.
The organizations that are right now accepting donations, Women for Afghan Women, Women for Women International, organizations like Medica Mondiale, other organizations that are like Voice is amplifying women. All of those organizations have direct access to Afghan women, Afghan women's groups. So they are the ones that we should speak to and listen to and follow, and they will guide us for sure. Okay. And I take my cue very much from them as well. But as far as Women for Women International, I set that up, the Afghanistan office, in 2002. And so they are the ones who remain on the front lines and are doing extraordinary work. So I would say follow all of those and pay attention to what people are saying and what they need.
Okay, thank you. And it's Women for Women International is the name of that group?
Yes, the one that I set up in Afghanistan, and then Women for Afghan Women, Medica, Voice, all of the ones that I keep posting and tweeting.
Okay, will do.
Wonderful.
Tell us how you got started in when you lived in Afghanistan for 4 years. Well, let's go back. Here are 3 ways. All right, well, whatever. Okay, 3 ways. We see if everybody can take a screenshot. This gives us. There are more, and if you follow Lina, she'll be posting more on her Instagram and her Twitter feed. But 3 ways are listed there. So
absolutely, and I will keep amplifying whatever ones I get. I will gladly share.
Thank you.
And whatever questions people have for me, please poke me on Twitter or wherever else, and I'll do my best to answer and to connect people with what they're looking for. I try to at least amplify as much as I can. You know, I believe that Afghan women, like all women, have a very strong voice, and what they might be lacking at times is a microphone. So if we, those of us who have a platform, like you, Rose, you do such an extraordinary job with it, if we can be that microphone for them, that already is a wonderful thing.
Well, that's terrific. I'll be tweeting links and getting these out there. For 2 of us can be doing that.
Absolutely.
So there you go. How did you get to know? How did you get to live in Afghanistan?
Well, this is a great story. You know, I had wanted to work on women's rights since I was 14. I knew that's what I wanted to do. And when it was 1996, actually, and I was in Washington, D.C., and I was in graduate school, and I was awarded a fellowship to work on women's human rights globally. And about 2 days into that job, the Taliban took over Kabul, and everyone was talking about Afghan women. And so this organization turned to me and said, look, you know, you're supposed to do global women's rights work, but right now there's something going on in Afghanistan, and could you just focus on that for a little while? And that little while turned into the entire year that I was with this organization, and was an interest and a commitment and a passion and a concern that I maintained for many years. And I went and worked. I worked at the World Bank. I worked in Bangladesh. I worked in Morocco. I worked in other places. I kept one eye on Afghanistan. And then after 9/11, the door opened for me, and I was asked by the president and founder of Women for Women International, would I take a job with her? And I said, if it is Afghanistan, then yes. And she said, all right, then off you go. And off I went in 2002. So that was the start of it.
That's great. Steffen, I think we have some great photos that Lina took during her time in Afghanistan.
I have thousands. I just need to have a display. I don't have enough wall. I need to find a way to display that.
Okay. Okay, coming.
Such an incredible, striking, beautiful, magical place.
Love this picture. And the one of the 2 girls. I think you wrote in your in a post on Instagram that these girls would have been about 2. So now are young women, and wondering what's in store for them. What's the future for them?
Exactly.
And what would you, I mean, you've been so many places. So is it the landscape in Afghanistan? Is it that the way of life is so different from many of, well, at least what we know in the West, but the gorgeous water. Yeah.
It's
you know, what captivated it so much for you?
It's the strength of the people. It's always about the people. The landscape is a wonderful addition. The kind of mystical aura about Afghanistan, definitely. It's always been the subject of stories, and it's almost fairy tale like in the myth and mystery that surrounds this country. But it is always about the people. It is about their strength. It is about their ability time and again to resist outside influence, and everybody has tried to get their hands on this country. And they have fought and pushed and survived over and over again. And the women in particular, I always measure a country by the women. That's the way I see the world. And they are extraordinary, incredible. And the women that I befriended in the time that I was there are still friends today. The women who were on my team, who worked with me, I'm still in touch with. It was just an extraordinary place where I felt so lucky to be there, and I learned so much. And I carried those lessons with me to every other country I worked in after that.
That's great. Tell us what happened. Tell us a bit about where you were born and your journey How did you decide at 14? What made you decide at 14? Where were you that you decided this is what you want to do, be a women's rights activist?
Yeah, well, my background is interesting. It's filled with all sorts of hyphens. So I'm Lebanese and Palestinian, born in Beirut, raised in Saudi Arabia until I was 9, and then in Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C. So lots of contradictions and lots of extremes. And I feel like the understanding of conflict and gender and the tensions around that were something I was just born into. I've had to negotiate them constantly. And I also think just being born a woman in the world is enough of an issue. It's enough of a challenge. And you recognize as a young girl, I certainly did, at a very early age, that the world views you as less than. You know that. You internalize that. You see how people treat you.
Did that become more pronounced for you when your family lived? I think you left Beirut during Civil War, and
yes, I was,
and went to Saudi Arabia. And what did that? What was that? If your memory of it, or what prompted your family to then move to the States?
Well, it was in part because of me, because I was getting old enough that I might recognize or understand that things were not entirely in line with the values that my parents had, or the views that they espoused, and what they wanted for me and for my younger sister as well. So, being the parents of 2 daughters, they thought that it was better to move to the States. And I think at the time that they moved, they did not imagine that the war in Lebanon would last as long as it did. And so they decided finally they would move to the States. And so I got to the States in 1984, around the time that the word terrorist was entering the lexicon. So it was a very interesting time to be a young brown person in an American school. So a lot of challenges to who I was and how I negotiate my identity. And that's always been a part of my life, the perpetual insider-outsider, which makes it very easy then to do this kind of work in some ways, because working across the world, you belong everywhere and nowhere, in effect.
So is there a place you call home?
Well, right, I decided after 20-some countries and 20-some years that I would move back to the States, and I've settled in New York. What's great about New York is that it's got space for everyone. I feel like no matter what, you're never the most eccentric person here. You can be whatever you want to be, and there is space for you in this city. So here I am home. But home is just as much on a plane. Home has been so many places. I look back on Afghanistan, and I feel like that's home, just as much as Lebanon, as much as Senegal that I loved so much as so many countries that I've had the privilege to work in.
Tell us, let's talk a little about Lebanon. They're facing they don't have a stable government. They're facing water, tell us what they're facing: water shortages, food shortages, and what does that mean, and what are the women in Lebanon trying to do?
Well, what's happening right now is the currency is so dramatically devalued, and people have lost jobs. People's health is at risk. There's an inability to find fuel, to buy basic supplies. Electricity is barely functional. Clean water, plus COVID. I mean, we still are not in the post-COVID era at all. Not anywhere. Certainly not in Lebanon. So all of these challenges continue, and the fact that the country has just seemingly hit rock bottom and manages to continue to go lower has put a massive toll on people. In addition, anybody who is able to leave the country, skilled workers, the well-educated people with dual passports have left. So there's a massive brain drain as well. And we see that all the time in countries that kind of spiral out of control, where people's livelihoods and lives even are compromised. So what is happening is, again, everybody's suffering, but women are really having to bear the brunt of dealing with obligations at home, at work, if they're still able to work, with children, with the sick, with the elderly, with all of the kind of public health related challenges that are now facing the country. It's been one burden after another, and I cannot believe how bad things have happened.
We have a comment from Rajan I haven't had to say the whole name. Timoteo Guardoyo, and excuse me if I've made a mistake, but he's writing, being a perpetual outsider, I am Indonesian and Filipino, raised a conservative Baptist, reverted to Islam at 39, helps foster resilience. I wish sometimes that resilience wasn't necessary, though.
You know, I say that all the time. People are only resilient because they have to be. You know, everybody applauds Afghan women and certainly Lebanese women too. I mean, we throw that term around so often as if, well, not to worry, they're resilient. Nobody wants to be resilient. Nobody wants to be put to the test over and over again, to have every aspect of their lives, every bit of freedom, mobility and choice and voice and opportunity and work and just the ability to live full, rich lives stripped from them over and over so they can prove their resilience. I think it's exhausting and I think it's a crime. And you're absolutely right. I wish we didn't have to be so resilient. And I find that to be an incredibly frustrating thing. It's a word I always cringe when I use because it's used as if it's an excuse to not help. And I think we should never let people have to be, we should never have people put their resilience to the test. We shouldn't get to this point. And we do everywhere, all the time. Look at Haiti. Look at, I mean, there's no country where there isn't an example of this.
We have a comment from Kirsten Alana, who is a travel photographer and blogger, who is just a terrific person. And she was the first guest I had on the show. And she's saying hello from Los Angeles, and so glad to be able to hear from Lina. So, and she says she loved your point about resilience. So thank you.
I was just building.
Rajan says so much for, thank you so much for the reply. So I'm so glad that people are commenting. Continue to do it, and we'll take them in and show them.
Yes, I would love the exchange. I would love, you know, anybody who wants to say something. It's I think this is really about all of us. You know, and it's a shared experience in so many ways, you know, whether you're Afghan or not, Lebanese or not, a woman or not, it doesn't matter. This is about humanity and seeing that come out, you know, again, does it have to take a crisis for humanity to show itself? I often wonder, but sometimes, yes, it does. And here we are again with another crisis and time to step up.
Let's look at your book. I think Steffen has a copy of the cover, the book that you did when you were doing research in Afghanistan.
Yes.
And let's see, Gender and International Aid in Afghanistan, the Politics and Effects of Intervention. So what were you trying to talk about in this book? And I guess my next question is, are you revisiting this book? Are you planning anything, an update?
Yes. Well, let me start with the first one. What was I trying to do? When I moved to Afghanistan in 2002, I was overwhelmed. I was the only expat running this organization that was all Afghans, men and women both. In the first year, I had 65 staff and 3,000 women that were in the program. And then it was just me, the only non-Afghan. And so I very much was immersed in the Afghan way of things. And I felt a responsibility to listen to that and to understand that. And like I said, it was the biggest lesson I've ever had in all of my work that I've ever done, and something I carried with me. And so what I did was I really wanted a chance to deconstruct that, to understand, and I was quite young, I wanted to understand what was happening and how I might do this work better. Because I knew at that time I was committed to a career in women's rights around the world. I did not know that I would spend 4 years in Afghanistan. I did not know that Afghanistan would never let me go, and you know, it would be like this relationship that keeps coming back to me. So I decided to document it all in the context of doing my PhD through the London School of Economics, where I wasn't much in London. I was in Kabul, and I said, I'm staying in Afghanistan, and I'm just going to do this research as I am living it in an organization that I'm running with people I'm working with, because they are telling me how things are and how they see things, and I just want, I want to be that microphone. And so that's what I did. So the book is a hopefully slightly less academic version of my doctoral dissertation, which is an extremely academic piece of work. And what I'm doing now is I am revisiting, revising, hopefully lightening the language, and certainly finishing the story, because now this is the conclusion of 20 years of engagement. We're coming up to the 20th anniversary of September 11th in a little more than a week. So that was what had opened the door for me to Afghanistan and really changed things for a lot of people. And I think it's time to kind of look at the full picture where we started with all the data that I have. I have so much raw data and it's so rich and all of these Afghan perspectives. And I really want to build on that and be able to tell the full story of the 20-year experience. And so that is what I'm trying to do now. Writing a book as the book is happening is an interesting challenge, but it's an important undertaking. And again, I feel really lucky to have all of that data and also a duty to share it. And I'll try and make it a little less academic this time. That's not much my writing style, and I really want people to be able to read it and understand it this time around.
And are you interspersing the data with live interviews or collecting quotes, or how are you?
Absolutely, all of that, and validating the original findings, what people had said about what they thought of the way things were going and what they predicted for the country and what they wanted and the support they expected and all of those kinds of things. Really the sentiments of both women and men that I interviewed are now kind of coming full circle. So yes, absolutely. I probably won't be able to reach out to all of the same people, but because I'm in touch with so many of the partner organizations and many members of my team, there will be some voices that come back in.
Thank you. Tell us a little bit about the Arab Institute for Women, which was founded in 1973, and I understand was the first in the Arab region for women.
Absolutely. It is the first academic institute focusing on women in the Arab region, for the Arab region, and it's one of the first in the world. It's an extraordinary little place. And when I found it, when I stumbled upon this job opportunity to lead this institute, I could not pass it up. It is an academic and activist hybrid that focuses on the 22 Arab states and really looks at advocating for social change and policy change, building on the education and the research that we do to make things meaningful for women and girls in the Arab region and around the world, because in the end, these issues don't stay neatly confined within their borders. And I have loved it. I think it is a small, strong powerhouse, a real kind of anchor. It has been there, again, almost 50 years. So it's got a lot of history, loads of credibility, and excellent reputation. And what is nice about an academic institute is that it is trusted. It's got credibility. It's got convening power. It is neutral in what might otherwise be a very polarizing landscape. So it really is a hub. It's like I call it a feminist fueling station. It feels a little bit like that. And that was the spirit that I wanted. It's not a humanitarian organization that's on the front line and armed by 50 staff. No, we're a tiny team and we're getting smaller, unfortunately, with the situation in Lebanon. But we are relied upon. We are trusted, we're respected, and I think that is critical. So that's really the essence of that rather special place.
Okay, we have a hello from Ross Brandt, who is a great social media guy and had something called Livestream Universe, and he hosted a whole. He now has a best-selling book with 100 predictions for the next year, and it's doing really well. He's
amazing. I should look at that.
Thank you for joining us.
Yes.
I guess my question to you is, to go back to your main focus has been gender-based violence. And one of the stats that, I still can't believe is when I read that 1 out of 3, I mean, you can say it better, but 1 out of 3 women in the world have somehow been affected by sexual violence.
Uh-huh. Or any form of violence against women. For me, this was what actually woke me up. You asked me what happened when I was 14, and it was a class called Comparative Women's History. And it wasn't a class about women's history. In the end, it was a class about violence against women. And it covered every region, every time period, and every heinous crime that has ever been committed against women, from female genital mutilation to foot binding, to women breaking their ribs to fit into corsets, to intimate partner violence, which is the most common and the best hidden form of violence, sexual harassment. I mean, all of it. And here was 14-year-old me, and I was mortified and I was enraged. And I said, that's it. That is not right. I had no idea things were this bad. I did not know the kind of world that I live in. I do not want any other woman to have to live in this world, and I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. And sure enough, here we are more than 30 years later, and I'm still at it. And the problem is, as long as we as women, as long as women and girls are not safe at home, in the streets, in schools, in the market, in public space, in public office, in every aspect of our lives. And we are not. We've internalized that lack of safety, and we exist with a very narrow, we live in a small world. And what I mean by that is our movement, our freedom, our mobility is restricted based on fears and concerns for our own safety, which invariably end up our responsibility. I do not know why. As if these things happen to us in a vacuum and we have nothing to do with it. So as long as those things exist, as long as girls can't walk on the street anytime, anywhere, freely, safely, and comfortably, we have a serious global problem. And we saw it during COVID. It is a global problem, in case anybody needed reminding, because everywhere countries saw an increase in intimate partner violence as a result of lockdown measures. So any country—
What was that? Was it like a third of a percent? Can we quantify it in some general way? I know one of the things you said is that we can't trust the data on sexual violence because it's underreported.
Especially when it comes to intimate partner violence, and especially in the context of COVID, where people are still locked down with their abusers. What will the report do, right? For the benefits have to outweigh the costs of it. And most of the time in many countries, including this one, the law is not on our side. Even when the law is on paper, women hardly have access to justice. They do not see justice served. We see it time and again, over and over. And I can give so many examples of just of this country alone. So the challenge is, what would it serve? Are they putting themselves at greater risk for doing that? And very often they are. We know of too many women who have tried to report or press charges or put in restraining orders who don't succeed for some legal loophole or whatever, and end up killed the next day or the next week. Far too many women are killed at the hands of their partners, the people who supposedly love them. So this for me is unacceptable, but it happens everywhere. And what happens far too often is when I talk about violence against women, people say, well, that's Afghanistan, or that's, this other country, that's Haiti, and that's Chad, and that's not here, and that's not me, and that's not now, and that's not us. And I say, no, it's everywhere, and it's all the time, and it's everyone, and that is the reality.
For those of us who are in the West and we don't have to cover ourselves, and we can go out without a man. Is it much harder for us to understand the kind of terrible restrictions they have in the West, or for us to make it that they are the other, and it's not like this here?
Well, Rose,
there's terrible rates.
If something happens to us, you and I in the States, people will ask, well, why were you there? And what were you wearing? And why were you drinking? And why were you alone? And you were out late, and you were by yourself, and you were wearing a miniskirt, and you had too many beers. I mean, we are not free at all. And any illusion that we have of being completely free and liberated is an unfortunate lie. We are not. As long as we tell our female friends, call me when you get home, and, carry your keys like this in case you got to impale somebody who, hops up in front of you in the parking lot, and look behind your back and put your headphones in, but don't put the music on because then you can't hear anybody behind you. And if a guy's walking this way, we live in a very restricted world, even here. And the first thing we hear time and again is, well, it was probably her fault. Oh, look at her sexual history. Look at the history of promiscuity. We're not free either. I mean, call it a miniskirt. It's all going to be the same thing. It has nothing to do with what we wear or who we are or what we did or didn't do. It is the patriarchy. It is misogyny. It is abuse of power. And it is the greatest crime of our time, or of every time.
And I think in that quote, you call it the major source of evil. Let's see. We keep putting up that quote, but I think it's so good. I think it was from an interview you gave.
Did I say that? Yeah, I
read it to us, Lina.
Yeah, you want me to read? Oh gosh, I can read it to you for sure.
Thank you.
I woke up to this realization that violence against women was the greatest crime, not just of our time, but of all time. Yes, I believe that. Once that is eradicated, all of these other rights that we're working towards will be available, accessible, and achievable. And what I mean by that is this. You can say, well, women have the right to work and women can run for public office and women go to school, whatever, all kinds of opportunities. But if you can't access the school, if you can't be safe in the office, if someone's going to harass you on the street, on the bus, then what is the point of all these rights? It is about safety first. It is about your bodily autonomy and integrity first. And then you can access all of these other rights. So we've got to start with this very base thing. It is a preliminary non-negotiable. And then we should access all of the other rights. But safety first. Oh, okay. I love all these questions.
Neil Parrick, who I think he's lived in Egypt for a few years, but he lives in Washington now with his wife, and he have a little girl. And he says, your guest is a great addition to your Woman to Follow list. So I'm sure he's enjoying. He says he's going to watch later, as I guess they have she's maybe 8 or 9, something like that. So
her daughter, my niece is 7, and I measure everything against her and what I'm doing to build a better world for her. Because I mean, it's not going to happen in my lifetime necessarily, but I owe it to her and to young girls everywhere to do something, to lay the foundation, to not have them inherit all of the baggage that we now carry. That would be a huge injustice. I cannot see that happen. Not to my niece or any girl.
Thank you. Let's just touch on Haiti for a minute. When there's this terrible, tragedy, who does the burden fall on? Is it like in Lebanon that the women are going to be the ones cleaning up?
I tell you, it's my belief that it's always women who bear the brunt of that. I mean, when you are the caretaker, when you are the one who is fueling the informal economy, doing all of the unpaid labor, caring for the elderly and the sick and children and education and the house and all of those things, when you already do that in so-called times of stability, in times of instability, it magnifies, that explodes. You just do more of that. And that is what people expect. And that is what you do. And that is how you deliver on all of those things. It is about your survival and the survival of your family. And in Haiti and everywhere else, that is what women do.
Okay, Rajan is saying he's a 6-year-old goddaughter. I try to give her books and other things to reinforce that she can be her own hero. That's great.
That's beautiful.
Thank you. And Kirsten Alana is saying, sadly accurate point, Lina, about patriarchy and how too often we women are blamed or have to be the ones to bear the brunt of change in order for us to be safe.
Absolutely. And the problem is we are in every culture, this one and every other one that I've ever encountered, it's always our fault. Like I said, and what were you wearing and what were you doing and why were you there and what were you drinking? But also in so-called more developed societies and maybe more technologically developed, there are now gadgets and technologies that you as a woman are responsible to acquire that are supposed to keep you out of harm's way, like a little ring where you can click and you send a message to the security or a text message to your mother or all of these things are, again, our responsibility. It is always the burden on the girl, on the woman to be careful and don't go here and don't go there, rather than on the boy or the man to actually not rape. That for me is baffling.
And how important is it to understand everything in the context of history? For example, I mean, this article in The Guardian, which you called required reading, said that the road is very long, and that even during the time of the of Americans in Afghanistan trying to provide aid and more education and all the groups that were trying to do this, sort of for every girl who got to go to school and then college, how many were not doing that? So that that this is a very unfortunately, long path, and that it's not as though everybody the women were all just dandy and, or, not dandy, they had all the freedoms they wanted in Afghanistan. And now, with the Americans leaving, they've lost them. So can you shine some perspective on that for us?
For sure. I mean, all the gains that were made were important, but uneven. It's always that way in every country. The idea that the urban areas like Kabul, the capital, and other cities benefited much more, were much more progressive, had more access, had more opportunity, had more education. Women were in circulation in public life. They were going to school, they were going to university, they were working. They were in public office. Women are in parliament. Women are serving as judges and police officers. All of those things that you see in cities, even here, in rural areas, you don't see as much. The changes take longer there. And in a context like every country that is patriarchal, it's not, it's not a quick fix. It doesn't just disappear. It always comes back. It's like you have to be constantly vigilant about women's rights. It's exhausting. I keep saying I'll never be out of a job as much as I aspire to be, because you do not ever get a break. It is one step forward and 10 steps back. And it's the same in where those gains are just so incredibly uneven. We're talking about social change and evolution in the way people think and the way people view themselves and each other and their rights and roles and responsibilities. That takes a long time. But it was happening, it was moving, things were going in the right direction. And what is happening now is not going to help.
Yeah.
That at least is obvious. Whatever.
Is there anything you can say? I mean, there are no quick fixes here, but for the, because I want to ask you, I don't want to forget to ask you about your Woman to Follow, but for people watching, or for women watching, and for men who were supporting women watching, what are some of the small things that you can say that we can do in our everyday lives to try to, get women to recognize women's power and mobility? And
yeah, I'm going to talk about that picture you put up right there that says "Start where you stand." I love it. I came from Nepal and Kathmandu, and it was graffiti that popped up after the earthquake in 2015. And I thought, this is amazing. And I stood in front of it and I thought, this is kind of what I want to say to everyone. The idea that, people ask me very often, wow, you went to Afghanistan and that's cool and that's crazy. And, I don't want to do that. And I said, well, you don't have to do that. Like, you don't have to go to places that I chose to do that, but you can literally start where you stand and work in the space that you occupy in your family, in your community, in your neighborhood, in your school, in whatever culture and context you exist in. Firstly, because you are from there, you are more powerful, you know the inroads, you know how to get things done, you understand the nuances, you know how to make change, and you are more credible when you are from the inside. And I tell you this as somebody who has always been from the outside, just about everywhere. So when you are from the inside, you have a lot of power to make change. And if you commit to doing that in the very small space that you occupy, that is a big space. That is a big change. That is meaningful. That is dramatic. That is contagious. You do it in your house with your parents or your kids or your friends. It doesn't matter, but you can stop things before they start. You can stand up. You can say things. You can be that kind of person who corrects things and who stands up for what is right. You can talk about consent. You can talk about safety. You can talk about our responsibilities to ourselves and each other. You can talk about how it is not the responsibility of the girl child to look after herself and preserve and protect her virginity. It's the responsibility of boys to treat boys and girls with respect. All of those kinds of things can come from within the household, and that makes a major change. And for me, that's the kind of change that I'd like to see. And if everybody took responsibility for their little spaces, I think that would be amazing. Then we'd be done, wouldn't we? I mean, then that's it. Then we've converted.
Very inspiring. And on that note, let me ask you, what do you think the significance of a hashtag like Woman to Follow, and the fact that, many people retweeted and added Woman to Follow all over the world in different fields?
I think there's so much power in using your voice to amplify the voices of others. And I love that you asked me, give me women to follow. And I gave you a list I'll give you a big list, more than what you asked for, because I think that's the point. If even the small platform that I have, I want to use to amplify the voices of others. This is not about me, it is about us, it is about all of us. And the more that we do that, the more that we showcase each other's work and celebrate each other's victories and share in each other's tragedies and support each other when we are challenged, the better off we'll be. I mean, isn't that our responsibility to each other as humans? To me, that just kind of came with my upbringing and my understanding of how and why I exist in the world. And I'm sure other people don't agree with that, but I really wish they did. But at the same time, I celebrate so much what you're doing. I love it. Like I said, I've used the hashtag. I'm going to keep using it for all the women to follow, because there are millions of us. But there are women we don't even know. You know, there are women whose voices we don't hear, women we don't see, women who aren't even connected, who deserve to be followed in non-virtual ways, right? The more we can actually hear those voices and share them on this extraordinary platform that wields so much power, the better we will be. And we all have access to those women. You know, those of us who try and use social media and tweet and Instagram and whatever we do, that's great. But there are so many more of us who are doing extraordinary work whose voices deserve to be heard as well.
Thank you. On that note, can you? I will put out a tweet tomorrow for a woman to follow. I'm trying to do something to initiate that everybody will tweet woman to follow on a Wednesday. Just, you know, I know Follow Friday is Friday, so in the social media world, we're going to try Wednesday woman to follow.
I never get those. I never.
Anyway, but the you know, who are some of the women that I don't know if we'll list them here, but if you can talk about why these women to you are so inspirational and why they're women to follow.
Well, what I did was I listed some young Arab feminist activists, I thought, who don't have a very big following, because, you know, what will be the point of that? They don't need to be amplified any further. But the ones who are doing extraordinary work and who are very courageous and putting themselves at risk sometimes in doing that. So there's a list, I think, of about 5 or 6, and I'd be delighted if you share those in whatever way you like. I also listed some organizations to follow that amplify women's voices, like She Decides, like Vital Voices, like Voice Amplified. So many organizations that really commit to elevating other women. And I think that is fantastic, and I love it. And I would say you are a woman to follow, and women to follow hashtag is definitely a tag to follow and to use excessively and generously, because there are so many of us. And the more we share and the more we tweet, the louder we get.
That's awesome. Thank you. Because I know we all, you know, like we follow and look at what Michelle Obama is doing in the States, and but we don't always hear about somebody like you or I guess somebody like me. And this is a group. I think you have a fellowship with this group, Vital Voices, this year.
And also with the Women's Media Center, their whole reason for existing is to amplify women's voices and promote them in the media so we can hear more women. Oh, there they are. Wonderful. Thank you so much. We can hear more women. They've got a great listing of women called She Source. So if journalists or anybody they're looking for women's opinions, or they're looking for experts on any issues, they amplify women's voices and change the conversation, and they do that. And I think there's so many of those, and I just want to shout out to the many that I did not mention, because I'm constantly impressed and inspired and energized by the strength of these networks and the feminist solidarity that we see even in the worst times, especially in the worst times.
I think my very first written Woman to Follow profile was as Soraya Chemaly was coming out with her book, Rage Against Her.
Oh, so, I love it.
A great book, and she is involved with the Women's Media Center, so they're doing great things.
I'm a fan. I have read the book many times, gifted it to so many people. Yeah. I love to talk about the power of anger, and I think it's just so critical, because if you're not angry, you're asleep. You're not paying attention. Yeah. I mean, we have to be angry, but how to channel that anger, you know, I think it's an extraordinary power, and we need to use it. We do need to be angry.
Thank you so much, Lina. I'm really happy you could be here. Just thrilled that you could be here with us.
Anytime. We could go on for days.
No, you gave us so many enlightening and points and ways that we can, you said stand where you are. Great advice. Start where you are. And I just want to. I saw that Laura Casellas wrote in that she's going to take your advice and try to keep it in mind raising her two boys. And a nice shout out from
It's beautiful. Thank you.
Ross Brandt, who was joining us for the show. And just thank you. I want to just mention I'm part of a group called Digimentors that is working to amplify events. That when COVID happened, this group has taken many many in-person events and made them online. And one of the things they do is have a Sunday show. It's sort of a Let's Read Fest with Sri Srinivasan and the New York Times. They read the New York Times with a guest who, a guest will talk about themselves and what they do, and then we all look at headlines and stories. And so this week's Sunday Read Along guest will be Sarah Maslin-Nur, who has been a reporter for the New York Times since 2011, and she currently covers breaking news for the paper's Metro section. And she is the author of a book called Horse Crazy. So I hope everybody will tune in for that. And let me just thank you, Lina. And I will be putting out some more tweets with the woman you and the organizations you say to follow. So my pleasure.
Institute, if I can be of use, I'm ready.
Thank you, Lina.
Anytime.
Great to have you. Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Appreciate it. There's one more thing. We will be back in 2 weeks with a great guest, and we'll be talking about mental health and the judicial system. We'll be talking with Judge Ginger Lerner Wren, who presides over Broward County Mental Health Court in Florida, and it is the nation's first court to be recognized as a specialized mental health court. So please join us on Tuesday, September 14th at 8 p.m. with Judge Wren. She's done great things, and it's so important what she's doing to try to understand the mental health needs of young people who end up in the judicial system.